This shouldn't come as a surprise, but safety is not a standalone compliance function. It's a core operational input that directly impacts fleet efficiency, service reliability, driver performance, and long term business outcomes. I'm Kevin Jones, editorial director at Fleet Owner Magazine, and this quick chat will explore how fleet operators are moving beyond reactive safety management and using predictive safety intelligence to improve overall fleet performance. Specifically, we'll focus on the launch of the new Descartes Fleet Safety offering and how the addition of Idelic expands Descartes' ability to connect safety, driver behavior, and operations into a more unified fleet performance strategy. I'm welcoming back Cindy Brandt, Vice President, Industry Solutions at Descartes, and she's joined by Hayden Cardiff, Vice President, Idelic Solutions, Descartes, and Brian Phillip, Vice President of Product at Descartes. Welcome all. Hayden, Brian, and Cindy will discuss how fleets can use AI-driven safety intelligence, telematics, and coaching data, along with operational insights to identify risk before incidents occur. Our chat will also examine how safety data can influence planning and execution, including assigning drivers to the right routes, reducing operational disruptions, improving coaching effectiveness, and creating safer, more efficient operations as well. Cindy, great to have you with us once again. Let's start with you. A lot of fleets have traditionally managed safety separately from operations. Why is safety becoming a bigger part of overall fleet performance now?
Kevin, that's really a great observation. For a long time, safety and operations really lived in separate lanes or silos, right? But what we're seeing now is a real shift. Safety is no longer just this compliance function that lives on its own island. It's really becoming part of the core components of overall driver performance, right? And I think there's really several reasons for that. First, we're starting to be able to connect the data better. We got telematics, video, real-time analytics, safety events. They're no longer isolated, right? We can tie them together to different operational outcomes. Think about downtime, fuel consumption, vehicle utilization. It's really changing the way that we look at a lot of safety data and linking it together. Second, we're seeing the real impact in the news of getting safety wrong, right? The cost of this has never ever been higher. Think of all the nuclear verdicts that are out there right now. So between nuclear verdicts, rising premiums, litigation risk, vehicle repair costs, one little incident can really have a huge financial impact. And third, and I think this is oftentimes overlooked, it's starting to become a real key, lever for workforce engagement and retention, right? Drivers want to feel protected, they want to feel supported. And I think that especially when we look at the younger people entering the fleet space, when fleets invest in safety, these young people are hearing, whether it's when they're investing in technology and coaching, it sends a real clear message to these younger folks. We're investing in you. And this really starts to build trust, confidence, and ultimately really drives retention. So I think that today we're seeing that fleets realize that safety and efficiency or operational excellence really go hand in hand.
Okay. Hayden, to you real quickly. Fleets have cameras, telematics integrations, safety systems already in place. But at Fleet Owner, we're hearing all the time about they're having difficulty turning all that into business decisions, action. What's the key there?
Yeah, it's really good observation, a really good point. We see that the biggest issue that fleets are typically having as they go across trying to fulfill their safety duties is that they have all of this data coming from so many different systems, but those systems are disparate and don't talk to one another. And when you don't connect the data and use it holistically, it becomes very challenging to make sure that you can actually turn that into more proactive risk identification. So we have a customer, Covenant, who has a really strong example of this specifically. So Misty Olszewski is a phenomenal safety professional and leader in the industry. She broke this down for me where she said, look, we have all of the tools and dashboards and systems you could ever want. We have ELDs and cameras and the FMCSA portal to pull data, and we have accidents and claims and injuries and all these different pieces that are generating driver information. And so they have teams of teams internally that have built dashboards and visibility across each and every single one of those different systems. And then they're looking at the top issues or the top drivers who are offenders of any one of those specific systems, and then they're coaching at the top of each of those lists. And they're putting so much time and energy and effort into doing this across all these different systems. But the biggest thing she realized was the accident rates weren't going down. And she took a step back and said, why is this happening? We're doing so much good work. Our team is putting in all this energy and effort, and we have all this analytics across the board with all these different dashboards. Why is the safety records, the safety, the accidents per million mile, the metrics that we care about, why are they not improving? And they realized that the drivers who were getting into crashes were the ones who weren't at the top of any one of those specific dashboards or any one of those specific systems. It was the drivers who were just under the surface on several of those. And so for her, the answer became clear. I have to integrate, tie in, and connect all of these disparate systems and take a more holistic approach to understanding driver risk, be able to not just aggregate individual events, but actually use predictive analytics and be able to be more proactive in how I address that. And once she started to make that shift, the results were staggering. I'm talking over 40% reduction in accidents per million mile, really, really strong results. And it really came from an understanding of like you have to get away from individual, disparate, non-connected systems into a more holistic coaching and safety program.
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head, Hayden. Putting all this together and being predictive rather than reactive. Talk a little bit about how fleets can identify and manage these risks before the accidents and claims and operational issues escalate.
Yeah, again, great question. So this is where fleets oftentimes we have this understanding of our goal is to be proactive in driver risk assessment. Absolutely, step one of any safety program, you want to be able to know and understand who's most at risk, why, so then you can pinpoint targeted coaching to help them change behavior. The issue is the standard process today is I invest in cameras, which cameras are phenomenal systems. We integrate and tie into nearly all camera providers at this point, so we have really strong relationships with them. But the challenge becomes for a fleet if I look at only that one system as my risk identification piece, I'm missing all of the other data points and I become reactionary. If the tools at my disposal are I look at a camera, I see critical events come in, I make the assessment of whether they're coachable or non-coachable, and then I call the driver, coach them on that event, mark it as coaching complete, and move on. All I'm doing is hand-to-hand combat and trying to just stay afloat as I work through litigation improvement as opposed to driver behavior change, right? So the shift there is if we as fleets, we as safety professionals, if we can change and kind of flip that script to say, I can tie in and integrate all these different pieces together, but more importantly, use historical patterns of behavior and say, I know these patterns, these events, this kind of breadcrumb of behavior leads to actual crashes. Then when I see those same patterns again, I can flag that, identify that, and be proactive in how I engage that driver and coach on the behaviors that are driving the risk. And so that's ultimately what predictive analytics allows us to do. If we can have just an enormous wealth of data. Here at Descartes, we have over 40 billion miles of driver data. We have over 500,000 unique individual crashes to where we can compare these behaviors lead to these crashes so that when new drivers come into that same predictive model, you can pattern match and say these patterns, we've seen this before. We know that this leads to crashes. So now we can flag those drivers at the top of a watch list, give you a breakdown of why they're at risk. And that allows you and the team to be able to more strategically and with a more pinpoint accuracy target the behaviors that are driving the risk and actually improve on-road behavior after that.
Okay, well, Brian, Hayden said kind of two things there. One, you know, safety managers are just trying to stay afloat. And then he talked about all the data you've got to drown them in. So everybody's talking about AI today. How are you using AI to help focus on the drivers and the risks that matter most?
Yeah, that's the real key, right? You've got a dozen different systems that's all just spitting out data left and right all day, all night long, and that's a real challenge for safety leaders and driver managers. And I think about in three key areas where AI and predictive analytics can really make things easier for those leaders. I think about in terms of visibility, analysis, and execution, right? And at each one of those phases, there's real opportunities for gain by using tools like predictive analytics and AI. So without getting into a ton of detail at the visibility level, it's really hard to connect data across all those different platforms, and that's why for decades now people have been living in multiple platforms and jumping back and forth between them. And the tools that we have available to us now, and that we've developed also internally over the last several years, makes it much easier to put all that data together and be able to, for the first time, go into a driver's profile and see all of their telematics, all their camera, all their training history, all their HR information, all their previous accidents, all of that data together, their FMCSA interactions, all of that information in one place, right? And that's been dramatically improved by those technologies that we're talking about. So that helps us to create visibility. On the analysis side, I'm not going to repeat what Hayden said because I think he did a really good job of talking about how we leverage machine learning, predictive analytics, and AI to really be able to shift the mindset from individual events to these overarching behaviors that you need to care about. So instead of going in and dealing with these dozens and dozens of events every day, you're dealing with one behavior for that driver. So that's kind of the analysis side of the equation. And the last piece is execution, right? I know that I need to go and have a conversation with Kevin today about his harsh braking. I've seen the pattern, the data is all coming together. The AI has helped me to understand that Kevin is a high risk for an accident because of that pattern of behavior. Now I need to go talk to Kevin. What am I going to say, right? And that is something that, again, was overwhelming before, to have to go and find all the information, sit down and think through this conversation that I'm about to have with you. And AI is making it dramatically easier to have kind of that assistant, right, that's helping you and feeding that information to you and saying, hey, Kevin, you're about to go, or hey, Hayden, you're about to go and sit down and talk to Kevin about his harsh braking. Here's what you need to know. Here's what you should be talking about. Here's the points you need to touch on. Here's his whole history. I've put it all together for you so you can take a 30-second glance and be prepared to walk in and have a really effective conversation. So again, I think there's opportunities across all of those areas: visibility and analysis and execution.
Okay. Well, Cindy, I can always count on you to cut to the chase and kind of make things simple for somebody like me to understand. Where's the biggest opportunity to connect this safety intelligence with planning and execution? How do fleets make better operational decisions, whether it's route assignments, driver fit, or just day-to-day execution?
For me, this is where things get incredibly exciting, and I could probably talk about it all day. But I think that the biggest opportunity right now is moving safety from something that was really incredibly reactive into something that now actively informs both route planning as well as execution. Brian and Hayden both kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I think that one, it starts upstream in that planning piece, right? Especially around daily routing or even strategic routing. If we start to layer in kind of the safety layer intelligence, what's a high risk route? What are high risk traffic patterns? Weather, historic or historically incident prone areas, right? If we can add that into route optimization, we can now proactively reduce exposure before a driver starts their day, and quite frankly, before we even assign a driver to a route. So now we might know that, that Hayden's experience level is lower than Brian's because he's a newer driver, which means we might not want to put him on a route that has a lot of risk associated with it. We might want to make sure that we put Brian on that riskier route. Second, in real-time execution, we have so much connected information. We have so much live data. We can start to intervene a little bit in the moment, right? So think about not necessarily, harsh events where we want to say stop speeding, but hey, there's weather coming. There's risky conditions, invoke your safe driving skills. or maybe even dynamically reroute them around that weather, or provide in the moment coaching around, there might be a hailstorm coming, there might be ice coming, there's real-time information we can get out to people. And then lastly, it's really closing that feedback loop into performance management. When we look at the concept of performance management, especially in last mile, it's about how the customer performs, how the order performs, the route performs, and the asset. And, safety data oftentimes just kind of sits in reports instead of being applied on or layered onto all this other information. Um, we always talk about getting other data sources to create more context. And this is what this layer of safety does with operations, is really creates an incredible contextual layer so you can understand what's really happening. But this is where you're going to start to see fleets reduce their incidents, improve reliability, and at the heart of it is really lowering costs.
All right. Hayden, add a little color to that, because we all know that a lot of fleets are still, picking up the phone and saying, "Oh no, I've got to do paperwork on an accident." How is AI actually helping fleets on the ground move toward preventing the conditions that create these events?
Yeah, that's again one of the challenges that fleets face is just the tools that they have available to them, right? So when you talk about reaction to events and trying to shift from being reactive to proactive, again, like when you look at what's available to them right now, it is simply trying to fight the good fight with each individual point solution. Most fleets that I talk to and kind of the industry standard that we hear is I invest in the camera, I get those alerts coming across and I try to coach them as they come. But again, like that is incredibly reactive. And so the best things that we can do is start to try and leverage the tools that are now coming available, like AI and machine learning and predictive analytics, to allow us to move away from trying to hit every individual event just because from a litigation standpoint we feel like we have to cover all of our bases, and move into this realm of I have confidence in knowing which of my drivers is most at risk. I can see and understand why they're at risk. And now I can focus my very limited time on the drivers who are at the top, the five, the 10% of those drivers who are sitting at the top of this watch list, where I can now say, I know that you have an issue with speeding, so I'm going to focus my coaching on speed management instead of 8 to 10 random phone calls based on different random events that have come in that all feel like white noise at best and feel like slaps on the wrist and get the drivers frustrated and at worst. And so now you can really start to leverage AI within the not just the predictive analytics, but also in how you engage with drivers. Brian talked a little bit about the coaching piece and being able to leverage some of the AI tooling that's available to make sure that you're saying the right things to the driver, that you're getting a full understanding of the why, and then using that to be more effective in your conversations with them. A big thing that we are proponents of, and this is one that I'll say until I'm blue in the face, but like AI especially, but technology broadly, cannot replace human-to-human engagement. AI and technology has to be there to augment the human to human engagement. Let's use it to take away the monotonous, day-to-day, time-consuming tasks that are preventing us from getting engaged with our drivers so that we can now use that time to better engage with our drivers.
Okay, Brian, let's go a little further into that. Not to role play specifically, but I'm a driver and you've called me into your office and you say the computer has identified you as, being high on the list of, possible problems. So I haven't had a wreck. I speed, sure. I have some hard braking because I'm going fast in traffic areas. What do you mean I need coaching? What is that all about, Brian? How do you work that?
Yeah, you set that up perfectly because I think the whole point to good coaching is to create a situation where they're actually willing to listen to you and they are receptive to that feedback, right? You go out and interview your drivers, and guess what? 95 out of 100 of them are your best drivers, right? Everybody thinks they're an amazing driver. And so when you sit down and you tell them, hey, we have to have a coaching conversation, they're like, it's you, not me, right? Everybody does that. There's always some excuse. And so the advantages of putting all this information together and making the shift, like Hayden's been talking about, from events to behaviors, is now we're not going in and having an argument about whether it was appropriate for me to be following as closely as I was in this specific instance on this specific road on this specific day, right? Because that's where you're going to argue with me. But as soon as we can use these AI tools and the predictive analytics to take this step back and create kind of the bigger picture and say, look, this is the pattern of behaviors, right? We're not just talking about this. This has been happening week after week, month after month. And here's how it compares to your peers, right? You actually have 4 times as many of these events as your peers, right? I know you think what you're doing is average. It is not average, right? And here's the impact of that, right? Because of that behavior, here's how that correlates to real accident risk, right? Here's how you're putting yourself, your and other folks on the road at risk because of that behavior, right? So once you've, I think, changed that dynamic of the conversation from let's argue about a specific event to let's help you understand what this pattern is, that it is recurring and over time, and it is out of the norms for other drivers in your fleet, then they start to listen and they're willing to have that conversation with you and actually engage in the rest of the discussion.
Okay, well, Cindy, certainly it's great to have the drivers start listening, but I also need to talk to the CEO and say, hey, this is working. What is actually some metrics we see that improve with drivers and routes and, optimization and, reduced disruptions and service reliability? What does that look like?
So I always say that safety is a huge contributor to efficiency and productivity, right? So huge impact here. When I am a safe driver, I am going to actually run my routes more efficiently. How could that ever be, right? Safety means slow. I disagree with that. Safety means efficient. So I think that there's a lot of things we can look at. We can look at stop density. We can look at overall cost per mile. And especially when we roll into that cost per mile, the cost of claims or the cost of accidents, as well as the cost of labor. I think there's an opportunity to grow your business without having to increase the number of assets. So the first thing is really those 2 KPIs. The second that I'm going to look at is I want to look at my accidents per miles driven. I want to start to really monitor the number of events that happen per million, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, million miles. I want to start to look at how many times I've coached. And if I coach people, are they moving up or down that watch list, if you will, to make sure that they're doing it? From a cost perspective, we can start to really measure things like what are my costs of accident claims? What is the cost of running the routes? What is the cost of drivers and workmen's compensation claims? Personal injury is a huge part of safety as well.
Very good. Brian, we've kind of touched on this. Is there anything else we need to add about making sure that humans, stay in the loop when it comes to fleet safety?
I would say there's a place where humans can be out of the loop, and there's a place where full automation and AI actually makes sense and will probably be leveraged more heavily in the future, especially when it's the pat on the back, great job sort of things, the attaboy, like let's give them a little bit of credit. We should be automating a lot more of that so it happens more frequently. And in the instances where it really is just an individual event, great. Let's automate that process as much as possible to make sure the driver's getting information about that. But when you're talking about these genuinely risky drivers that we've identified at the kind of the top of that risk curve, the human needs to stay in the loop there because it just completely changes the dynamic with the driver, right? And at that point, it's having the human there creates a completely different impact than just clicking the button through online training or videos, right? It just creates a completely different sense of seriousness about the situation, which ultimately drives a completely different outcome in terms of that driver actually changing behavior. And on top of that, you also get a much better, it's an opportunity to relationship build. And you would be surprised how many of our customers have said they never want to move away from that human coaching. You can't do it for 80% of your drivers, but if you're talking about that targeted 5 or 10%, absolutely use that as an opportunity to build relationships with those drivers, which helps you not just in safety, but operationally, retention, and a myriad of other positive ways as well.
Well, Brian and Hayden too, you can jump in. But do automated attaboys really work? Or otherwise, where do you see AI having the biggest impact when it comes to the risk reduction, coaching, safety performance?
I think there's opportunities across the board, and all like in those areas I talked about at the beginning with visibility, analysis, and execution. I think there's opportunities across all of them, and I won't rehash it. The one thing I would add when you talk, Kevin, about well, where is it going kind of next, right? What are some of the kind of new frontiers in using AI and machine learning for coaching? I think it's the coach to coach, and we've done a great job. I think the industry has done a good job of using some of these tools to make sure that we are getting better coaching and development for the drivers. But oftentimes that coaching and development is coming from a manager or a leader of some kind, right? And we really need to start shifting toward how can we make those managers and leaders better equipped to have the right coaching conversations, right? So I think you're going to see a lot more focus in the coming couple of years on the coach side of the equation here and how AI can facilitate that.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, I think looking a little bit more macro around safety as a whole, I think the biggest area that I see from an opportunity standpoint to leverage AI is really just around taking the data that we're now starting to integrate and tie in from all these different disparate systems and being able to generate faster and more effective insights out of that data. And so I think one of the things, again, in the vein of trying to remove monotonous, time-sucking tasks away from people to be able to do more important, impactful things, right? Being able to more quickly search, understand, and analyze the data and surface insights to management, to safety operations, safety and operations. That's going to be a huge, huge boon when it comes to the improvement of safety across the board. Being able to not only have predictive analytics to say which drivers are at risk, but then being able to look at all the data across your fleet and say, hey, this particular terminal is having challenges with this particular metric. Here's our suggestion on why. Here's what you've done in the past. Here's how you can now start to potentially address that. Here's some recommendations around coaching plans that you've already used, and here's the success rate of those plans. Just being able to quickly analyze and understand the situation across the fleet, find nuances or any kind of patterns within the data, and then be able to surface that up to you with recommendations around what to do about it. That level of detail and discussion and insight is something that will dramatically change the safety landscape because now you're giving the tools to every level of team member, from the frontline, lowest level team members all the way to the executive suite. They now have the tooling to be able to see and understand the data, make good data-driven decisions, and then track the impact for those decisions over time.
Well, Cindy, and then I guess Hayden and Brian, y'all can jump in. But as always, Descartes it makes perfect sense to me now. But obviously there's still a disconnect somewhere. What's the pushback, or why is there still fleet operations and safety strategy are kind of in two different silos?
Well, I think it's just part of it is tradition, right? I mean, it's that, they've always been separate departments that loosely report up to the same structure, but they're really not interacting a lot. So I think that's problem number one. I think problem number two is that we're just starting to see the evolution, if you will, of being able to understand how to synthesize data from multiple sources, right? safety was my job or optimization was my job and route planning. And, either I've got to make my drivers safe and being in compliance, or I've got to get the trucks out the road. So I think now, like I said, there's this evolution that's happening. People realize we've been collecting terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data and doing nothing with it. Or we put it in a dashboard that's flat, right? Okay, you had 22 speeding events. What does that mean? Right? But now it's 22 speeding events with a bunch of context around it. And all of a sudden the lights are going on and people are saying, wow, there's an incredible amount of contextual information I've been missing to make good decisions. And a lot of the technology companies and partners that are out there are starting to understand how to put it together to make it incredibly meaningful. So I think that's kind of the evolution or the great awakening that's happening.
Yeah. So, I mean, Cindy, I think you hit it on the head there, and also in some prior comments just around safety and operations have historically had a fairly contentious relationship with safety, feeling like operations is always trying to get one up on them and kind of do things in
Exactly.
an unsafe manner just to get a load on time.
Yep.
Whereas operations has often looked at safety as a four-letter word and said, "Hey, they're just trying to shut my load down. They're trying to make things harder for us." And there's always been kind of this friction. Now, I'd say over the last 5 years or so, maybe even a little bit longer, but over the last 5 years, I think there's been a lot of movement within the industry to really start to bridge that gap and at least philosophically understand that a safe fleet is also a profitable and efficient fleet. Now, within that movement, there still has been a lack of connectivity within operations and safety when it comes to ownership of safety outcomes. And I think that to me has been the biggest disconnect that I've seen is within a fleet, if they don't have operations team members actually owning safety outcomes, or at least having KPI or metric responsibility for their drivers' safety outcomes, you're not going to have the strongest safety culture. And that's just because, just from a numbers standpoint, right? When you look at a fleet, they've got dozens, if not hundreds, depending on the size, of operations team members, and you can typically count the number of safety team members on one hand, right? So they're just outnumbered, and there's not enough safety personnel to effectively disseminate a strong safety culture within the fleet if the operations team members aren't also responsible for taking taking it upon themselves to manage safety outcomes and have those safety KPIs as a part of their overall mix. And so when that gap starts to get filled, you really start to get operations safety in sync and on the same page. And so that's where, to Cindy's point, like being able to have operational decision-making capability and safety insights and data married up, you can really close that gap and really start to see not just strong results from route planning and operational decisions being fed in with safety information, but also having everyone aligned around a common goal. And I think
Mhm.
that's where you start to see the best results.
Okay, to kind of put a bow on this whole discussion, what's it going to look like once this is actually happening, once it comes to fruition, once fleets realize this makes sense to integrate your safety intelligence in your operation? What's it going to look like in the not too distant future?
I think from a platform perspective, our vision is these are not separate solutions. There's no such thing as an operations silo and a safety silo, right? This is one consolidated platform where all of that is really tightly coupled and fully interconnected, and you really don't think about one without thinking about the other. And obviously, we're leading now with a platform certainly that makes that to happen and puts all that information together and make sure it all plays nice in the sandbox. And to Hayden's comment there about culture, I think that's going to bring culture along with it. So the culture will look different, 5 years down the road, because the people now working in these areas are working in platforms where all of this information is in front of them every single day, all combined together.
I always ask this. How do you calculate ROI on accidents that no longer happen?
Fantastic question, Kevin. That's one that we work with fleets on all the time, and it really comes down to historical understanding of where you've been, and now as you're implementing and making changes to your safety programs, where you're at and where you're going. Right. So from an accident standpoint, obviously you can start to look at accident rates and see, hey, as we've made these changes, is my accident rate going down? That's a fantastic metric. You can also start to look at the cost. So when obviously from a risk standpoint, which is a little bit different from a safety standpoint, but when you start to look at a risk through a lens of risk, now you're starting to look at, are my claims going down? So not just accident frequency, but also the severity and the claims of that going down. That could be one, because you're preventing crashes, but also two, if you have a stronger safety program and a platform that helps to understand and categorize and contextualize your safety coaching and the things that you're doing, that helps to defend against the plaintiff's attorneys who are coming at us with reptile theory and trying to just drum up these nuclear verdicts on the backs of no real merit from the facts of the case. And so when you have all of your ducks in a row, you can not only reduce the frequency of the accidents, but also the severity, and then start to kick out some of the unnecessary cost of crash was not your fault, but you might not have had your training program documented effectively. You might have had some compliance issues, and then the plaintiff's attorneys get a hold of that information, and now they, put you over a barrel, and you have to kind of fork out dollars where the liability wasn't yours, but now the jury is said you need to pay. So all of these things wrap up to say, if you can start to really focus on and leverage these types of tools and these types of technologies, you can really start to see massive improvements in accidents per million mile, CSA scores, and also the total cost of risk and insurance numbers going down as well.
All right, Cindy, bring us home. I'm a fleet owner, and I've been impressed with this discussion. What do I need to have ready for Descartes, and what kind of answers will you give me when you call on me?
So I think that the most important thing you have to be have ready for us is an open mind, right? Number one is understand what are the challenges that you're really trying to solve. We're going to talk to you about a lot of different things. We're going to ask a lot of questions. So be prepared to answer a lot of questions. Think about your processes today. What do you do? And also gather some information. What is your average cost per accident? How many accidents are you having per million miles? It's really important to understand those different pieces so that we can help you understand what you have today and then what you could be in the future. But again, I say just be open to having a lot of discussion, because that's when we're going to find the best answer and the best solution that's quite frankly a little bit custom to you.
Excellent. As always, I come away from these discussions knowing a whole lot more than I need to. I don't even run a fleet. And it's like, oh, this is easy. Anyway, Cindy, Hayden, Brian, thank you all very much, and I look forward to chatting again.
Absolutely. Thanks for
Our
having us.
pleasure. Thanks for the time.